Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. I just ask that you remember to like us, to subscribe, just help keep us on the air. My guest today is someone that I met just a couple months ago. But I was told by a good friend, you got to interview this person. You got to get to know him, and you got to get to know his wife. And I just happened to be able to be in a conference or at a conference where they were both in the same place at the same time, and we did get to know each other. So his name is Ed West. He was born in Pittsburgh back in '52, went to the Pittsburgh public schools, and then on to Greensburg High School. He's a graduate of Point Park College, and he spent 50 years in show business as a technician. He moved to the U.S. Virgin Islands back in 1997, and he became a charter captain, and that really fascinated me. I've only been out on a charter a couple times up in Connecticut, and I got to tell you, that's one spiritual experience. I recommend that to anybody and everybody I can. So he returned to Pittsburgh during the pandemic. He's got 3 grown sons. And I'm not going to talk much more because it's his story that we want to hear. And then I'm going to ask some questions afterwards. So everybody, this is my good friend, Ed West. Ed, the mic's all yours.
Well, thanks for having me, Bob. I was amazed that you wanted to, so I'm here. My story started out in Old Pittsburgh Hospital in Homewood in 1952. My parents were both working class people. They had both served in the Army, and I was raised an Irish Catholic. And I went to catechism. I learned what they said in catechism and what the nuns taught us, and I tried to follow along as best I could as a young man. As you say, I went to Pittsburgh Public Schools, where one day in 7th grade, I sat behind a girl with long red hair who had just moved from Philadelphia. I tried to see how many spitballs I could get stuck in the long red hair until she realized what I was doing. And then she shook her head, turned around, and called me something I will not share with your listeners. So after that, my father was moved to Youngwood, PA, and as a result, I went to Greensburg High School. So I didn't see this girl with the long red hair during that period. And then I got a chance to go to what was then Point Park College, now Point Park University, to study theater. It quickly dawned on me, getting involved in show business as a technician, not as a performer, but even so, you kind of have to have a worldview to anchor yourself, because it's a very insecure world, which once you understand that, you can be very secure in it. But what helps keep you secure is kind of having a firm footing in your belief system. So we had, my wife and I, because I got together with that girl with the red hair.
Say, how'd she become your wife all of a sudden?
And in 1976, we got married, again, at St. Paul's Cathedral in the Catholic Church. However, we drifted as the pressures of daily life occurred, and we had our first son, and we really weren't churchgoers at that time. And it wasn't until he was of an age where it was time for him to go to school, and we figured, well, how should we educate him? So we thought it best to raise him the way we had been raised, at least until we could find something better. Well, in 1982, a friend of ours loaned us a book on the Edgar Cayce readings, which we devoured. And I had already been thinking about the situation that, see, my mother was a nurse, so we believed in science and we were accepting of evolution. But to me, as I would ponder these things at night, if we evolved from lower orders, when did we first understand that it wasn't okay to kill, or that it wasn't proper to steal, or things of this nature that didn't seem to work with that? And at the same time, the teachings of the church were also not really resonating with me. You know, it was obviously, it was a very strict Catholicism that we had been raised in, and didn't seem to be really helping me in the 20th century. But when I started reading the Cayce readings, it answered a lot of questions for me about, okay, so we did descend from above, and this is how we got entangled with matter, and this is how we became involved in evolution, and this is why, just like you learned in catechism, we are trying to get ourselves back to the source, back to God. And so that helped me with that. My wife shared similar feelings after reading it. And again, working in a business where people are often not rooted at all in their worldview or their religious beliefs, I at least had that to hold on to and share with our children at home. And as a result, I don't know that our children have gone on to be churchgoers, but I know they question everything. And as Cayce said in one of his readings, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Right. So for me, I don't give up hope for them finding their way as I continue to search for my way. And it's an ongoing process. I mean, it was 40 years ago that I first took up the Cayce material, and here I am still trying to find my way back to the source. And my wife and I joined a Search for God study group a year or so ago, and
so that's the first group
that's the first group.
In?
Yeah, well,
okay.
Yeah, when we lived in the Virgin Islands, there really wasn't a study group there that I was aware of. So it was after a conference at A.R.E. when some very enthusiastic young ladies gave me phone numbers that I came back to Pittsburgh, and I called one and left a message. And then I called the other number that I'd been given, thinking they were two different groups, but to find out that both of these numbers were for women who were of the same group, and therefore my decision was made. This will be the group then. So I owe that to Elizabeth and Joan, who were really welcoming and sharing of their thoughts. And that has made it possible for Tony and I to really look forward to the Monday night Search for God meetings so that we can read and discuss. So part of what works for us is that we are discussing rather than having this is it, done, okay?
Right.
And, because we're inquiring minds. And that way we can find out how other people feel and also share how we feel. And for me, that's worked out very well. It's where we are going from here. All of the experiences we had, my wife worked as a dresser in show business, so she also had a career and ended up spending many years with Pittsburgh Opera, where she became the head of the wardrobe department. I did several tours as a prop man. I also worked on about 12 movies, and I did a lot of other work, including part-time work at Channel 4. So I had a lot of different experiences in those different venues doing stagehand work, which is varied depending on where you are. And then to go and change our lifestyle the way we did and go from that kind of frenetic lifestyle to the more slower paced island lifestyle was a big change. And it allowed us to reflect more on our lives, the world, and again, the Edgar Cayce material. I took one book with me when I went. It was The Origin and Destiny of Man by Lytle Robinson. And it basically tried to tie in the Cayce readings with the history as we knew it at the time and the history as Edgar Cayce explained it. And a lot of it, of course, dealt with archaeological work that at the time was regarded by mainstream archaeologists that this is as old as this civilization is.
Yeah.
And Cayce had said, no, it's much older, and there's much more to this life on the planet than has been allowed by our academians. And I have to tell you, in the 40 years since I took up that book and started reading, that much more of what Edgar Cayce said has been proven true. They have found compartments in the Great Pyramid. They have now found dating that shows archaeological remains in our own country of the presence of Native Americans much earlier than had been known. And in fact, near us at the Meadowcroft Village, yeah. Right, they now say that there were people there 16,000 years ago, which of course 40 years ago would have just been no.
Right.
Also, the Viking village that was up in Canada was still not really archaeologically proven at that point. And now, of course, it is. And we do know that there were Vikings in North America before Columbus got here. And on and on and on. Where did the Mayans go? We think, well, Cayce said they traded with the people in the southern United States, which, of course, nobody believed back then. But now we're saying, oh, wait a second. These remains here in Poverty Point and in parts of Florida and up into Alabama are very similar to the way Mayan towns were laid out. They don't have any stone pyramids, but the lifestyle goes on. And in fact, Cayce thinks that those people went on to be the mound builders that then put 100,000 mounds across America. So they didn't disappear. They're there. We just didn't understand how they migrated and what they did. So I think all of that is ongoing, and I'm sure long after I'm gone, someone will be figuring out, hey, wait a minute, this is what Cayce said all those years ago. Uh-huh. Speaking with climate change or about climate change, about earth changes. And as I got older and I saw this new discoveries in all of these things, for me, it reinforced the belief that, yes, we came from above, we got caught up and entangled in matter, and now we're trying to get back to the source. And ultimately, I think most religions have a form of that in them. It's just that this is the form that appeals most to me. And
Right.
what I use to live by. I have to tell you, I've not had any out-of-body experiences. I haven't had any visitations. I just know that my whole life, this has been a touchstone that when I have a question about what is right, what is morally right for me to do, what's ethical for my profession, I can go back to the Cayce material and I can find that this is what Cayce would have said. This is how he would have behaved. And so I can take that and apply it to my own life, just as anyone can, because all 14,000 readings are available to anyone in the library at Virginia Beach. And I don't think that there's anyone else that has been a so-called sleeping prophet that can say the same thing with the same amount of physical proof or evidence in the library. So for me, it works. I can't say that this is what everybody's path to spirituality would be or could be, but as I said, for me, it's a touchstone that helps me try to be the best person I can be so that ultimately I can work back towards the source. Now, maybe not in this lifetime. I may have to come back and do it a couple more times before I get it right, maybe a lot more times. But at least I have a goal. I know where I'm going, and I know that I must treat my brother as myself. I must do that which I know to be right, and I have to work on all the things like patience, first among them for me, because I was a very impatient man. And part of that was the career path I had required timing and immediacy. And so now I have to find a way to be more patient, be more understanding, in order for me to get back to where I know I have to go.
So it's quite a transformation, I think, to go from the life that you had here to go to the Virgin Islands, become a boat captain or ship is it boat or
it's
ship?
A boat.
It's
Okay.
a boat. Okay,
the biggest one
the
biggest one I ran was 75 feet. So technically it's bigger than a boat, but it's a boat.
Yeah.
Let's not be pretentious about this. I ran a boat.
Okay. And was that somebody else's that you captained, or was that your own? Or
well,
how did it happen that you even left and said, here's a good idea, let's do this?
Well, that's a long story, but I'll try and make it brief. My wife thought one winter while I was listening to the gas meter click that I should take up a hobby so I wouldn't worry about things so much. And she anticipated stamp collecting or coin collecting or something like that. And I just always wanted to learn to sail, because the first time I stood on the fly floor at the old Playhouse Craft Theater, I was looking at those drops and thinking, they look like a square rigger. Someday I want to learn to sail. So I found a guy who was teaching sailing lessons in Pittsburgh in the winter, which was probably a miracle in and of itself.
Yes.
It was a gentleman named Ron Hammond, and he had a small sailboat store up by Butler, and he was trying to make some business for his shop to sell these small sailboats. And so he had a class on Route 8. Tony and I went there and took those lessons and decided we liked it. And we did it on the water at Lake Arthur for our final exam, and we didn't kill each other and we didn't sink the boat. And we thought, well, we're good at this. So then we went down to Annapolis a few years later, and we took the advanced beginners classes, followed by 5 days on the Chesapeake with our two sons at the time. And again, we didn't kill each other and we didn't sink the boat. And we thought, well, we're pretty good at this because we didn't die of starvation and we didn't have any other difficulties, and we enjoyed it. And so sooner or later, we had to make the move to where we could do more sailing, where the weather was better for that. And that's what we did. In 97, we sold everything we had and bought a boat in Tortola. And Michael, our middle son, and I brought the boat from Tortola to St. Thomas, where Tony met us with our youngest son and an 80-pound German Shepherd. So we all lived on that boat. So I couldn't really charter that, because if I chartered it, it meant my whole family was coming with us.
Right.
So to answer your question, no, the charter work I did was primarily on other people's boats. And then we lived on our boat, which, as the children grew up and left, got bigger for Tony and I.
Right.
Michael left and took the dog, and then Patrick went away to college, and then there was just Tony and I left to be on the boat. So we had enough space for the two of us, because it's a life that is more outdoors than indoors.
Yeah.
If you're sailing the boat, you're obviously out in the weather. If you're traveling around the island, you're outdoors. And the weather is such that you can be outdoors most of the time. So the indoor space is not as important as it is here, where if you don't have an indoor space, you could really have a miserable winter.
Right. So as a spiritual experience, that whole period of your life, would you say that it met your spiritual needs at the time?
I think it did, but what else it taught me, because the nature of living on a small island is that there isn't much separation between peoples. The island's only so big. It's not like you can say, well, I'm going to move 10 miles down the road and I won't have to deal with those people. No, there's only so much space, and the people all have to live in it. So whether you had a lot of money, a little money, or no money, you're still in the same confined space. So you learn to value people, I think, more just as who they are than, as our society would say, by the car they drive or the neighborhood they live in or any of that. And I think that in that respect, yes, it made for spiritual growth, because you were dealing really with the individual and how they fit into the neighborhood or the society that you're functioning in.
Yeah.
And not so much what they had or what they spent, because in our society, the people that have all that money you never see.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
They're insulated, right? So
Yeah.
So here everybody was in the same pot, and we all swam around in the same water, and it was quite, for me, it was quite enlightening, and it was quite satisfying.
Yeah.
And I think my wife felt the same way. Otherwise, she probably would have left me. But instead, she didn't.
So you left that life and you're back in Pittsburgh.
How did that happen?
What happened? Yeah.
Well, I think it had to be divine providence, because we had 2 Category 5 storms within 2 weeks of each other in 2017. So we were at a disadvantage. The boat had been badly damaged. And fortunately for us, our son's in-laws invited us to live with them, which we did. And we soldiered on, all of us, through the recovery after those hurricanes, which is now going on in Florida for the people that had those 2 hurricanes.
Yeah.
So certainly Tony and I can sympathize with them. But then after that came the pandemic. So there wasn't going to be any charter work, because people weren't allowed to do charter work. And in fact, the British Islands, which is where most of the charterers wanted to go to see those tiny little islands with the little beach bars and those nice little sandy beaches, really had closed down. They were closed. And if you went there, they would probably impound your boat and put you in jail because you're not supposed to be there. So that ended that. Yeah. So there really was no opportunity really to do that work. And also there was the call of grandchildren, which we now have 2 of, and the fact that, maybe we're just getting a little too old to live on a boat. So with some misgivings, but recognizing the limits of our our physical bodies, we said, maybe it's time to go back. And so we did. But the final nail in the coffin was obviously the pandemic, because that was it. It was the defining, well, if you're going, you better go quick. And so we did. And we have 3 sons that are grown. One lives in Pittsburgh, one lives in Plumboro, and one lives in Hempfield Township. So we live in Greensburg so that we can, we're within driving distance of all of it.
Right.
And we have 2 grandsons who, if I'm lucky, get a chance to come up and volunteer with me at the food bank if they're off from school on those days, because they have, sometimes the holidays fall on distribution day, and then they can help. And they get, community service hours for that, and it helps them at school. And they go to Barack Obama, so it's one of the city schools. Anyway, that's what our life is now. We do volunteer. We work at the polls. We try to stay involved in our community, and we try and maintain friendships and contact with our children and grandchildren. And again, within what our bodies allow us to do as we age. And that to me is fine. I keep working, trying to stay healthy and work on my spiritual development as well.
Yeah. So I met you at the A.R.E. In October, and we were there for a conference on ancient civilizations.
Right.
And it sounds like that harkened back to your
my initial involvement.
What you were really looking at
that's
way back when.
That's really what drew me, was the concept of what was here before. And that's always drawn me. What was here before? I spent some years working for the Cinemet Corporation, and they had these huge old theaters, these old movie houses downtown. And just as someone from live theater, I knew looking at these buildings, they were something else. And I asked one of my coworkers, what was here before? Nothing. They were always this.
Yeah.
So Tony took me to the library after I got done work, and I looked them up to find out that the Fulton Theater had been the Gaiety burlesque house when it was built in 1904. And what was then the Gateway Theater had been the Alvin Theater. It had been built in the 1800s, which became the Gateway, and then it became the City Club racquetball courts. And of course the Warner, which started out life as the Pittsburgh Grand Opera House, which then became the Grand, and that became the Warner Theater. So all of these buildings had history that went back further.
Right.
And that appealed to me, just as the ancient civilizations are the same thing, but on a grander scale. And so that's what drew me into the Edgar Cayce readings, were the readings about the ancient civilizations in Egypt and America and Atlantis and Lemuria.
Yeah. So I have on display, for those of you watching on YouTube, the Search for God Study Group book that is actually a combination of 3 volumes. And my wife and I ran study groups for 5 years, took 5 years off. Then I started another one when we went to Rwanda.
Wow.
Beth Ehrlich took over that study group and has kept it going.
Yes, she has.
That's been really nice. Good to see. So out of everything, this is maybe a nasty question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. This will test your memory. Out of everything that went on at that conference about ancient civilizations, what intrigued you the most?
I think it was Manu's presentation on the Temple of Inscriptions at Edfu, and how he was able to find the passage that mentioned the Atlanteans, which of course was overlooked by so many people. But he was looking for some evidence of the Solon story, that there had been a continent and it had disappeared, and he found hieroglyphics that basically mentioned not the name Atlantis, because they didn't necessarily call themselves that, but the civilization that had been lost underwater. And at the time frame that Cayce said that it occurred, and of course everybody poo-poos the date, but it's getting more traction because, as you're aware, Robert Schoch, the geologist, is now proven that the Great Sphinx has to be like at least 9,600 years old.
Yeah.
And unlike Cayce, who had no hard evidence, Schoch says when the Egyptologists say, no. He says, I don't care what you think. Egyptology is an interpretive art and an interpretive science. I'm a geologist. This is hard science, and this is the way stone erodes. And it would take much longer to erode like that, and it's done by rain. And the last time the Sahara had that much rain was like 9,600 years ago. So there you have it. The evidence is being found to support the concepts of there being civilizations during the last ice age and before that we are finally finding evidence of. And that was the piece in that conference that I felt was the most meaningful to me, because that was the subject that was closest to my heart. One of the reasons we like to go to that conference is because whatever updates there are in finding evidence for the older civilizations, usually it's presented there before it becomes common knowledge.
Yeah, that's something that really impressed me, that's an annual conference, and you get those updates every year. And there were people there. In fact, there was somebody who was coming in via Zoom.
Right.
Because he was on site still doing the work.
In Egypt, yeah.
And we were getting an update like that was an hour old. It wasn't wasn't 2 weeks old. It wasn't 2 months old. It was really happening.
Well, yeah. I mean, we don't often get that. I mean, most of them are presenters that are there in person, but that certainly was.
That was impressive
at this time. Yeah. Anyway, we've always found that, and in addition to the subject matter covered, of course, is the fellowship of so many good people, good thinkers, friendly, accepting people that are always in attendance. And I think that it's a collective neighborhood that we look forward to going back to every year. I think it's the acceptance of Cayce attendees for one another that we find inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah, I just had a surprise with somebody I interviewed yesterday. She's a pet communicator, and we were talking about her work with animals. And I should say an animal communicator, not just pets. But she said she recently moved to Alexandria, Virginia, and she spends a lot of time at the A.R.E. Center. And you know, she's got quite a history with Cayce and Cayce's work, and belongs to a study group, and that took us off in a whole different direction.
As that often happens.
Yeah.
You find a whole new facet to a person, and you want to know more.
Yeah, well, the Cayce work, I think, is so relevant now because so much of what he said and predicted is now being proven, as you said. So there's more and more interest in okay, who was this guy who was telling us the future way back then? Yeah.
Yeah, who spoke of climate change and ancient civilizations and all the things that we are interested in now that maybe because of the timing of it was not of interest to normal people then. Because remember, there was a Great Depression. People were busy worried about immediate things like housing and food and
Right.
whatnot. They may have not had time to contemplate what Cayce's reading said. And I really don't know when they became available for people to just read, unless you were in Virginia Beach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that has a lot to do with it too. Availability may not have been what it is now.
Right, right. I just want to take you back to the Mayan situation for a minute, because I recently learned that there are annual pilgrimages from Central America to Pittsburgh.
Really?
Because the Mayans did come and settle up in this area.
Oh.
And
were they?
I'm privy to some information that.
Can you share it?
Don't
get in trouble.
Just that something was found in Frick Park.
Wow.
And I won't say what, and I won't say where. That may really lead to a major discovery there.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. I used to play in Frick Park as a young child, and my wife lived next to it.
But the Mayans see Pittsburgh as a holy place, as do some other people, because of the vortex at the juncture of the three rivers, which is really four rivers, because there's an underground river.
Well, I was aware of the fact that the Three Rivers were a meeting place for the Native Americans years and years before the Europeans got there, where they viewed it as, hey, this is a good place to control because of the transportation on the rivers and being able to control the land. I'm sure that the Native Americans saw that the same way.
Right.
And well, that's fascinating. I'd be interested to hear more when you can tell more.
It may be years. We'll see. Because it's kind of like Meadowcroft when, and if you've been out there and heard the story, my wife and I just last month, went out there for the first time.
Oh, really?
That farmer discovered what was there and just kept it quiet and didn't tell anybody, and waited until he could find the right researcher who could really do the archaeological study the way it needed to be done. So, and that's kind of the same situation in Frick Park right now.
Good.
So
let's do it right.
Let's
do it right. Well, that's really uplifting. I'm excited for that. Yeah. I think that's cool. What was here before? Well, obviously.
There was something.
Yeah. So that would be quite a breakthrough if that could be, have the site established and with proper credentials so that it was
right.
It was legitimate. Nobody could say poo.
Well, rumor has it that this was known way back when, which is why Frick Park was set aside.
Oh, okay.
As a park, so that nobody would go in there and dig it up to create houses and buildings and businesses.
I am unaware of any of that, but I'm glad to hear it.
Well, I don't spread rumors, no. So I won't mention that.
That's good.
Yeah. All right. We have come to the point of our podcast where I always ask the guest to leave us with some words of wisdom. Now, what that means is whatever it means to you, but this is your chance to tell our audience whatever you'd like to leave them with. Now, somebody told me in a recent interview that, well, I could just say, don't eat yellow snow. That's my wisdom piece to leave with the audience. You can't use that one now. It's been used.
Did you have Frank Zappa on? Well, you know, I might be hard pressed here, but I will share what I told each of my 3 sons when they left home. And that was to enjoy life, do what makes you happy, but don't hurt anyone.
Okay.
That's what I told them. And so far, they seem to be doing okay. So maybe that's the first time they ever listened to their father, but that'd be good.
Well, as long as they're happy. They're happy, you're happy.
That's why we nurtured them all those years, so that they had the opportunity to live the life that they have. And good for them.
Yeah. All right, audience, as always, take what resonates with you, put it into your life, put the rest on a shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.